On this episode of AvTalk, the longest flight in the world is set to return soon, but with a few twists. European regulators are moving forward with recertification of the 737 MAX, and Cathay Pacific closes its Cathay Dragon subsidiary. Hello and welcome to episode 96 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. And hello, Ian. How are you in the, I assume, what is already the frosty, bitter cold wasteland of Chicago?
It's still too warm out. I mean, I'm doing very well, but it's still too warm out. We're in the 60s today, which is just unfortunate.
That's unfortunate. I know you're a winter person, but...
Yes, I am a winter person. I like 14 feet of snow on the ground and bitter cold. I like layers, but it's nice. There's fall color. I did some accidental plane spotting the other day, which is always fun. And I had, for the first time in my entire life, I had a go-around happen on my head.
Oh, on your head? Why were you in the way?
Well, fair enough. So I've seen go-arounds happen before, and this wasn't the coolest one I've ever seen because I didn't get to see much of it because the reason for the go-around was low visibility. But an A320 was coming into land at O'Hare, and I was out hiking along a river trail that runs pretty close to O'Hare. And on approach, everything sounded normal. Everything sounded, I was like, oh, this airplane can't really see anything because it was foggy and rainy that day. And then all of a sudden I hear this, this whining, screaming A320. I was like, ooh, go around. And I pulled up the app. I forget what it's called, flight something, and, saw the trail starting to climb away. But that was a really cool sound.
And it was a Neo, right?
That it made. I don't think it was a
No,
Neo.
it was a CO, so definitely the extra loud, spicy flavor.
Yes, exactly. Extra crispy. But they came around, and then they successfully landed. So on my way back the other way, I stopped as an Emirates 777 was coming in, and that was fun to watch go over.
I had some accidental plane spotting just yesterday myself, actually, too. There's a federal wildlife preserve just outside of JFK, which helps explain why there are so many birds at and around JFK. But they happen to be on the 13 left visual, or the localizer, I guess, our nav approach these days, which pretty much has everything swing around the entirety of Jamaica Bay right over where I was. So even in the middle of the afternoon on a Monday, there were still some pretty good arrivals. I think a British Airways 300 ER, a bunch of A330s. So accidental plane spotting all around this weekend.
This is what we've been reduced to. So
didn't get to see a go around though, but
take what we can get.
Yeah,
it was nice. It was
they're
fun.
Definitely audibly distinct. Since I lived out by JFK for so many years, you could absolutely tell the difference between a departure and a go-around just on the noise of the engines alone. They're very distinct.
When I officially recognized that I've probably been doing this too long, my mom lives about 2.5 miles from the end of O'Hare's main arrival runway. So the runway, well, up until the new large arrival runway opens, it's the one that's used for nearly all large aircraft. And I was on the phone with her. I was at home and I was on the phone with her, and I heard the go around, and I was like, oh, that's probably Qatar going around, because it was the right time of day. And sure enough, that's what had happened. And she just kind of told me that I was a little nuts. But I think that's the point at which I realized that I'd been doing this a long time.
Oh, yeah. It's good that you've gotten up to that level. I've definitely identified a large number of flights, not only by the aircraft type, but also the airline and the flight number due to the time of day. It becomes pretty easy back in the day when airlines had schedules that weren't changing by the hour.
Yeah,
and you
exactly.
could hear, oh, that's a GE90 at 6:25 p.m. It must be AA 101 going to Heathrow. And of course it was. But these days, I have no idea what any schedule looks like.
Yeah, it's who knows what's coming. And especially here with all of the cargo mishmash going on, you get surprise 747s, which I am not complaining about whatsoever. But yeah, there's no way to.
That's the best kind of 747.
Exactly. So what else has been happening in the past couple? You have been fighting with a squealing sound, and
I didn't know we were actually going to talk about that here. I thought that was in the show notes as a joke, but
no, let's talk about it because I need you in top form, Jason.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah.
And if the squealing is bothering you,
there's been an annoying squealing sound in my neighborhood that was not made by an Airbus A220, which I will not stand for.
Oh, I heard it. You heard it finally?
People are probably wondering what the hell we're talking about. So why don't you explain what it is you heard?
So
this is a good topic to talk about, actually. I don't think we've talked about this.
No, we haven't. And I finally heard it. And now my wife is super annoyed with me every night because we put the kids to bed, and then there's a Delta A220 that comes in from Salt Lake City, and it gets in at about 9:00, and I hear the sound pretty much every night now. And of course, I turn to her and I tell her that it's the Delta A220, and she just kind of rolls her eyes and goes back to whatever she's doing. So you had posted about this, I don't know, a couple months ago or whatever, and you heard a distinct sound. And either saw the aircraft or looked it up on the app and said, oh, it's an A220. And then you're like, well, what's the deal? And I, just assumed that it was, engine noise or whatever. But then a couple weeks ago, I finally heard it. And it is truly a distinct, it's like a low pitched warbling.
It sounds like a whale.
It really does. Yeah. It sounds like, yeah. And so I'm going to try and record it. And if I can get a clean recording of it, we'll put it in the podcast in a future episode just so we can, prove that we're both not crazy. But I know other people have heard it too. And there's been some varying explanations, but basically the most convincing one I've seen, it has something to do with the resonance of the geared turbofan and then how that resonance changes as the aircraft moves relative to your position, and how things are happening as it's preparing to land. So I don't have an exact answer, but if you're near an airport where A220s are landing, keep a listen out because it's a very, very distinct sound.
Yeah, it's distinct. And let's see if I can play this back, if you can actually hear it. Let's see if this works. Were you able to actually hear that?
I but
it sounds like a whale. And the thing about it is it's not louder than your typical engine noise or the surrounding areas. I actually tried to take some rudimentary, extremely non-scientific sound readings. It's just that the sound is so much different than any other engine noise because it's so kind of low pitch, but kind of whiny. It pierces through the ambient noise because there's just nothing else out there that sounds like it.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like a sad whale.
And they do,
or maybe a happy whale. I don't know.
They do come on a schedule, so when I hear it, I think whale because it's completely unlike any other of the other stupid ambient noises I hear outside.
It's not the screaming high pitched metal.
No. I think that's over. I think that finally stopped. But if the A220 makes the noise, that's fine. It's allowed to do that.
There you go. So let's follow up on what we talked about last episode for a few minutes. We had Steve Giordano on from Jet Test and Transport, and that was by far one of my favorite interviews. And judging from the feedback that we've gotten from listeners, it was one of theirs too. And so we had talked about in the episode what Steve was going to be up to after we recorded. And one of the things that he was working on was bringing a former Jet Airways 777 out of India, and he was going to be delivering a 737-400 freighter from Florida to New Zealand. Well, that happened, but on the way into New Zealand, something else happened. He was flying in the left seat, and the left side window, the outer panel of that window, shattered. And it doesn't affect, the flying of the aircraft. The aircraft, he landed no problem. Everything was fine. It was just the outer panel. But, that's not something you want to have happen.
No, but he does go on to say that they actually see 2 to 3 of those per year. The last one was on a 757, and it was the front windshield, which is, I bet, a lot scarier and a lot more difficult because that obstructs your view. But this is apparently something that does not super frequently, but not unheard of frequency happen to aircraft that are pulled out of storage after a long period of time.
I mean, and that makes sense. Things sit and get whatever they get, and then you take it off the ground after it's been there for a long time. You put it up in the air, send it through a couple of pressurization cycles, and I could see how that would happen. But good thing it was just the outer window. The flight deck windows, and all windows on aircraft, but the flight deck windows especially, are made of a variety of layers to accommodate things like this specifically. So he made it there, and then is, I guess, on his way back. So I'm really glad that it was just the outer panel.
I bet
he got a good
too.
Story out of it. Yeah, absolutely. So that's our update on episode 95. Jason, new business. What do we have?
In a rare bout of good news, I guess this is good news, Singapore is reinstating its ultra long haul nonstop flight to New York with a twist. It's actually going to New York this time.
Yay!
Yeah, that's nice. So they're shifting over what was the longest flight in the world from Newark to JFK, as any good airline would and should do. And they're reinstating that soon, actually, November 9th, which is only, 2 weeks from now? So
yeah.
Yeah, it's 2.5 weeks from now, which is pretty soon. So this flight to JFK is actually 3 miles farther from Singapore than Newark is. So this is officially, when it operates, will be the new longest flight in the world.
Whoa.
Yeah.
The
new hotness. So it'll operate 3 times a week. The JFK Singapore segment is blocked at 18 hours and 40 minutes. And there's a twist this time, though. They are not using the A350 ultra long range, the ULR that was specifically purchased for this route. They're using just a basic A350 long range aircraft, not the regional version, not the ultra long haul version, just the regular A350. That has 42 business seats, 24 premium economy, and 187 economy seats. So if you are one of 187 people who would like to sit in an economy seat for 19 hours, good news.
You can do that.
You can do that. But they did specifically call out the need for cargo for this flight. So I can't imagine they're operating this for passenger demand, especially since you can't even go to Singapore if you're an American. I don't believe you can transit now. But this is almost certainly a ploy for nonstop cargo rather than human.
Yeah, and one of the big points they made about the JFK port, flying to JFK rather than Newark, was that it would allow them to better service their cargo customers. So that was one of the big things they mentioned. And I think Gavin brought this up on Twitter. The A350s they've got for this, the non-ULR, just the regular old A350-900s they've got for this, are the increased maximum takeoff weight variants. So they'll have the ability to carry a bit more. So it's not really about passenger load. I mean, you could book the economy seat and have a pretty decent chance of
having an entire cabin to yourself.
Having at least. So I think that, it's certainly less about the passengers and certainly more about the cargo. But it'll be interesting to see how many people actually end up on that flight. Yeah,
this is not a route I expected to come back anytime soon. So I'm quite surprised to see it. I mean, in November, in 2020 at all, and coming to JFK is a nice added bonus. But they also have no guideline for when the one-stop flight that went via Frankfurt will return. That's due to come back whenever the market dictates, which could be who knows when. Well, I mean, that was on the A380. So, I mean, yeah. So who knows when the stop will come back, but it used to also be 777 as well. I think it rotated in 777 seasonally, so that could happen. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But yeah, I don't. If you're barely needing the single flight, I can't see that
that other one coming back anytime soon. But yeah, certainly something that I did not expect to see. I mean, because they've got cargo. How much faster can it be? I mean, 19 hours versus 24, 25 with a stop? I mean, if you're just hauling cargo. So it's interesting to me. I guess they've decided that, those extra few hours are really going to make a difference.
Yeah, well, Singapore doesn't have its own dedicated cargo unit, right?
Yeah, they do.
They do?
Yeah, they operate 747s.
I mean, I'm sorry, not Cathay. Who are we talking about here? We're talking about Singapore.
You were both right and wrong. You said the right airline. But
does Singapore still have its own cargo operation?
They do. They do, yeah.
Oh, haven't seen them in a long, long time then.
Yeah, I often forget they're small, so I often forget that they're there, but they're still there. But even if they were going to use a passenger aircraft, it seems to me, what is so critical that those extra few hours, or maybe it's a fuel savings. I don't know.
Who knows?
But
yes.
Either way, I will take this good news and I will not look it in the engine.
Yes, absolutely. And I do see they do have 7 747-400 freighters in Singapore Airlines cargo fleet.
Yes. So let's see, what else do we have? I guess in generally okay-ish to good on the spectrum of news, the European Union Aviation Safety Agency executive director came out last week and said that the headlines were interesting. He was speaking to Bloomberg. Bloomberg went with the headline that says the European regulator says 737 MAX is safe.
Yeah, that's not what...
I mean... That's not quite what, I mean, he did say that, but he didn't, it wasn't like a final, we're done.
No.
It was, we're moving along. The news to me was that they've harmonized the timeline between the EU and the FAA.
Right. They are now...
Is what it really sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. EASA is now caught up to the point where FAA has already been. FAA has gone through the comment period, as we've talked about before the aircraft is actually okay to fly again. Now EASA is up to that point where they are putting their recommendations up for their own, I believe, 4-week comment period. But again, the article or the headline made it seem as if the MAX was retaking the skies imminently. You still have to have airlines go through the pilot retraining process, and that's going to take a long time.
Yeah, I mean, this week, American Airlines said that they're going to have it back in service at the end of December. I think it was December 29th. So just really sneaking under the 2020 wire there.
Yeah, I'm just going to say that it's not going to happen.
Okay. I was going to ask what your thoughts on that were, because to me it sounded more realistic, but still optimistic.
Right.
So we'll see. But beyond the headlines, as far as the EASA news was concerned, I thought the really interesting part was that they've found themselves on the same timeline as the FAA. And to me, that seems to be not at all an accident. So because they've been pushing very hard for, and by they, I mean Boeing and the airlines have been pushing very hard for kind of a regulatory harmony so that we're not seeing, this regulator says yes, this regulator says no. And EASA has in part agreed to allow, to not require certain hardware changes prior to recertification. They'll have to be retrofitted, but come in with the MAX 10 and then be retrofitted back on. So I thought that was an interesting way of going about it.
And that's the first we've really heard from a country other than the U.S. with the FAA about where the MAX stands. We have not heard anything recently from China specifically. That they had a huge chunk of the grounded MAX fleet, and I don't believe we've heard anything out of their regulatory agency.
I was just about to say I would love to hear something from China. Absolutely.
Yeah. Or the UAE with the Fly Dubai fleet.
Yeah, I mean, what we heard from them via the FAA public comment.
Yeah, that was weird.
I still don't understand that part. But we heard from them there, and I guess we'll hear from them, in the future. I mean, there's only so much they can say, I guess. So we'll see where that goes. But things seem to be moving along. Certain airlines, American, is, I think, overly optimistic. Others have just not said anything yet. So we'll see. To me, I think the realistic barometer is what Southwest does.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. Is Southwest has a huge vested interest in the MAX. I don't even know how many aircraft they had or how many they have pending delivery sitting in a desert somewhere. But I don't believe Southwest has really said much of anything about it recently, has it?
They have not. Not very recently.
I think it's foolish of American to put a date on the MAX returning. There's just no need to do that at this point.
It's very strange to me, and I don't understand why they did it. And the only thing that I could think of is, as far as a calculus is concerned, is that maybe that pushes something along. We've scheduled it, but they've done this before. I mean,
right.
Various airlines have said, well, we're scheduling it for, November, October, January, July, whatever. And it's come and gone. So yeah, I agree with you. I think it seems
the only reason it needs to be in the schedule is so it's actually scheduled in there a few months ahead of time, so people can actually be on it. You can't just really insert it at the last second. But yeah, I don't know. It seems a little early to put a firm date on it like that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe when pilots start training, we're actually training these people. We're actually starting to do software updates and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see. In the not good news category, Cathay Pacific announced today that they are reducing their staff by thousands. And as part of that, the Cathay Dragon subsidiary will cease operations immediately. And that is exactly what happened.
They're not great. Cathay, much like Singapore, has no domestic market to fall back onto. So they've had very little revenue coming in since there's such heavy restrictions on actually flying into Hong Kong. They really don't have any business right now, which is really unfortunate. So they've had some dramatic cutbacks. As Ian just said, Cathay Dragon gone immediately. They will not resume flying Cathay Dragon, and the rest of that fleet, which is mainly Airbus A320 family and A330s, will be distributed amongst Cathay Mainline and HK Express, Hong Kong Express, which is a low-cost carrier wholly owned by Cathay, I believe, which is a big drop in the passenger experience on board if you're going from Cathay Dragon, which is kind of like baby Cathay, and you're going to a low-cost carrier like HK. Not great. But also the first Cathay Dragon 321neo just rolled off the line in the last day or so. So that's always awkward.
Yeah, well, just new titles, I guess.
And I think Seth Miller said just change the red to green, and you got Cathay.
Yeah, there you go. Problem solved.
Yeah, but that's unfortunate. And Cathay also announced, or I believe local media had questioned, that the 777X that they were initially expecting this year or next year will now be pushed out beyond 2025. So there isn't even a date for that now. So the future for the 777X is not looking particularly bright. And I made the comparison earlier today to the A380, and it may be up there in terms of exceptionally bad entry to market timing. Like the A380, it was the wrong aircraft for the wrong time, and it sure seems like the 777X is the wrong aircraft for the very wrong time right now.
Well, but the problem with the 777X is actually just getting it to enter the market. I mean, you've got Boeing's delay. You've got the GE engine delays; those seem to have been resolved, and then you've got the Boeing flight test program delays, and now you're finally getting the aircraft ready. And then look what happens.
Nobody wants it. It's just far too big for COVID era airline operations.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who takes. I mean, Emirates is going to take some, obviously. How many of the order they actually take, that'll be interesting. And when they actually take them, also interesting. Lufthansa maybe takes them. I mean, that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
I mean,
it will be, as A380s retired amongst all these airlines we're talking about, it could be potentially be a good replacement for those A380s that are being sidelined and probably never returning. But these airlines are also grounding aircraft that are smaller than the 777X. So the timing all around could not be any worse for this aircraft.
Poor 777X. And it's a really nice aircraft, too.
I haven't had the chance to see it yet in person, but one day I hope.
Yeah, what one day. So you've been following the DoD's study of COVID transmission aboard aircraft. They partnered with United Airlines. They've been doing some research over the past few months, and they released a report this week. And the headline of the report was, "It's difficult to catch COVID on an aircraft." You've done a bit more reading on this, and so I would like you to share the insights you have gleaned.
Sure. So basically, the DoD took a couple of United aircraft in a time where they weren't doing anything else. This is a couple months ago when the aircraft were sitting idle, a 777-200 and a 767-300ER. So this was conducted both with wide-body aircraft, not narrow-body. But basically, more or less, they filled up the aircraft with a bunch of dummies, not actual passengers, dummies, and a whole bunch of sensing equipment to determine if one passenger on board the aircraft is infected with COVID and is asymptomatic and is not wearing a mask, how likely is it that other passengers on board would get infected? And at the end of the day, the report more or less said it's virtually impossible. It's not impossible, but it's extremely improbable that other passengers will contract COVID on board the aircraft. And this is before mask requirements were really a thing. That is to say, I have reservations and exceptions with this study, and that not everyone wears a mask on board. You're always going to have one or two jackasses on board who refuse to do it. You have times when you are eating a meal or drinking a drink, which happens on every flight. Airlines are resuming service, so not everyone is going to be wearing a mask at any given time. And honestly, I think flying is safe. I think the filtration systems and the air circulation and the air refreshing coming in from outside is sufficient to keep the risk of contracting COVID infinitesimally small, but I'm not too encouraged by the rest of the travel ecosystem, what I've observed from people who are flying in the airports and hotels and shuttle buses and everywhere in between. Just flying on the aircraft is a small portion of the travel experience. It doesn't account for the entire ecosystem from A to B. So while flying itself might actually be the safest part of your vacation or your business trip, there are other factors that need to be looked at. What if there are multiple passengers on board with COVID? What if you have the overhead air nozzles turned on? There's really more factors, I think, than this study accounted for, but it's a data point that says your risk of contracting COVID on board an aircraft is low, and that's good, but it's still not getting me to travel, mostly because I can't travel anywhere because Americans aren't welcomed anywhere I want to go.
That's a very fair point.
Yeah. So that part sucks.
Yeah.
But if you have to travel domestically, whatever, for business or for personal reasons, it's good to know that as long as everyone is wearing a mask, you should have nothing to worry about.
Yeah. Yeah. That is welcome news. I guess this falls into the category of we'll take what we can get.
Yeah, exactly. Just be smart about it. Wear a mask. Listen to the scientists and the people who know more than you or I about this. And don't be that guy or girl who decides they don't want to wear a mask because they heard on Facebook that it's not good for you.
So speaking of not good for you, we've got a winning bid for Jet Airways.
Why?
That I told you, it's not good for you. The CalRock bid was accepted. And so they're now looking at resuming flying inside of 6 months.
Why?
Again, I do not know.
Okay. I mean, last year we were talking about Jet Airways. Someone we know who was just recently on this podcast was going to scoop up one of their 777s who's been stranded for, I don't know, a couple of years at this point.
Well, I don't think they'll be resuming flights with that particular aircraft.
No, but this is ridiculous. India's completely closed off, I think, to most countries. So where are they going to fly to?
I have no answers beyond what I have already
reported
here.
Maybe they need a new name. Are any airlines out there that we know that have been in constant financial trouble coming up with new names?
Well, I mean, we've got Baltia. I
was looking for you to transition over to Alitalia.
Oh, I guess.
Yeah.
But that's okay. Fine. Yeah, I
put that down as a failed transition.
That one's a failed transition. Anyway, moving right along. Okay, so here's the thing. It's not a new name. We don't know what it is.
Nobody knows what it is. That's what makes it so fun.
I was reading this article in Flight Global, and the headline is Italian ministers signed decree establishing Alitalia's successor. And I thought that's interesting because Alitalia still exists.
Yeah, and they're still operating right now.
So the government signed a decree to establish a new national airline to succeed flag carrier Alitalia. So basically what they want to do is reinvent Alitalia. So right now they're calling it NewCo, inventive title, I am sure. And so they want a new national airline because they've been trying to figure out what to do with Alitalia, because Alitalia is one of those airlines that cannot be killed. There are a few of them. We've talked about them multiple times on this podcast, but Alitalia, so in this particular instance, they want Alitalia, but not Alitalia. But it will be Alitalia. It just won't be called Alitalia. But it'll be a new airline, but it'll actually be Alitalia.
I'm confused.
If anyone understood anything I just said in the past 30 seconds, please email us at podcast@fr24.com and explain it to me.
I think the only thing we comprehend of this is that they'll be shrinking the fleet in some way or another.
Yeah, it's very, very not clear to me what they're actually going to be doing, because all of this is talking about, reversing its earning losses, investing in the fleet and all of the ancillary things that they do on the ground, but it doesn't say how they're going to do that or what will be changing other than we're calling this a new carrier and it's going to be invigorated and it'll be great. So I don't know what's going on.
Pretty much the only thing they've said for sure is that they don't want to be in SkyTeam anymore.
I mean, does anyone?
Ooh, ouch. I enjoy SkyTeam because that's where my points are.
Yeah. Sorry. No, I suppose this is a separate podcast, but what is the value of alliances these days?
These days, I'm not sure there is.
So we'll set that one aside for another podcast. But they have not said much, and who knows what will happen. Hopefully, they keep that 777-300.
That thing is still flying. The one aircraft they were supposed to get rid of is like the one that's still operating.
Oh, nothing makes sense. Everything is strange, and nothing makes sense. On that note, let us take a quick break.
Podcast title.
Yeah, I did. Let's take a quick break. Catch our breath, and we will come back with a rundown of new stuff and some milestones that have happened over the past couple of weeks. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. And now we've got the portion of the show where we run through a variety of milestones and things that have happened in the past couple of weeks that don't really need to be discussed in depth, but are worth mentioning. The first is that Qatar pilots are getting yelled at for not using a single engine to taxi, and they're supposed to be. And Jason knows more about that.
Sure. So it's specifically taxiing into the ramp, and this is a cost-saving move, as obviously operating two engines is twice as expensive as operating one engine, give or take. Qatar actually expected 95% of the time for its pilots to be taxiing in on a single engine, where in reality, its pilots were only doing that 55% of the time. And it is actually looking to take disciplinary action if it finds that any pilots are taxiing in on two engines and there isn't a justifiable reason for it. So I went, as I typically do, to Twitter and said, hey, commercial airline pilots, why is this a thing? Why wouldn't you turn off an engine and do single engine taxi? And it turns out, Ian, as you might imagine, there are a bunch of legitimate reasons why you might not do that. The first of which is that in COVID times, it is actually really quick to get from the runway to the gate in many circumstances. Since traffic is down so much, there's a lot less ramp congestion. And with a lot of aircraft, specifically, I'm told in this case, the GE90 and the 777-300ER, there's a cool down period that needs to be adhered to. Apparently, that's 3 minutes. So after you land, you can't turn off the engine for at least 3 minutes. And there might actually be some cases where you can get from turning off the runway to the taxiway and get to the gate in about 3 minutes. So that's a bit of a problem. There's also cases where some airports have what's deemed to be a significant upslope onto the stand, or you have to cross an active runway, and you need the power of two engines to make sure you can get across the runway or up that hill. It might be because the APU is not working and you need increased airflow for these days, because you need the constant airflow from the air conditioners to keep that air being constantly treated through the HEPA filters and bringing air in, and in most cases, I guess, bleed air in, fresh air from outside. And also, apparently, in some cases, it's a pilot tactic when they're upset with the airline. It's an easy way to, basically a negotiation tactic to burn extra money that might not need to actually be burned. In most places, this is not something the airline can do anything about, because it's recommended to taxi on one engine, but it's not something they can really mandate. But I was told by multiple pilots in public that this is sometimes a tactic that's employed by pilots when there's a union issue of some sort, or basically a bargaining chip. So that's that. But not great that Qatar is pulling data from flights to see how often its pilots are taxiing on one or two engines and threatening disciplinary action. Apparently that will not fly in many countries where there's organized labor unions, which is not a thing in the Middle East.
Huh.
Who knew?
That was more in-depth than I expected.
Yeah, you kind of led into this segment as it won't be in-depth, but I did it anyway.
You went in-depth.
Yeah.
I didn't know there was that much, because we hadn't really discussed this particular issue. So I actually learned something listening to this podcast. There you go.
Who knew?
So other things that have happened this week or in the past couple of weeks, sticking with the Middle East, Etihad became the first Gulf-based airline to overfly Israel. It was Etihad Flight 88 from Milan to Abu Dhabi. Basically took the most efficient path, which passed over Israel, and for the first time that actually happened. Then a few days ago, they flew the first passenger flight to Israel. So both accomplishments, and then upcoming, there will be UAE-based carriers flying to Israel, Israeli carriers flying to the UAE, and that'll all be coming up beginning, I believe, early next year are the first regularly scheduled flights. What else do we have? We have an order from Sky Express.
Well, that's good. It's rare to see any aircraft order these days. This is from little Greece-based Sky Express, who does not currently have any, I don't believe they have any jet-powered aircraft. They only have ATRs in the fleet, I believe. So this is their first Airbus proper order, and it is for 6 A320neos. So, yeah, that's nice.
Take what you can get.
Yeah. So technically their first Airbus order, even though ATR is kind of, sort of Airbus.
Close enough.
Close enough. So yes, A320neo, 6 going to Sky Express. Put it on the book for one of the very few and far between orders of 2020.
Again, taking what I can get here. Not a new order, but a transfer, and an interesting one at that. Wizz Air took delivery of an A330 freighter to operate on behalf of the Hungarian government. That particular aircraft is a former Qatar Airways cargo A330. So it's currently painted in the standard Qatar Airways livery minus all of the IBEX markings. So it's just that gray top. It certainly looks kind of like a military aircraft at this point. So it would be interesting to see if they rebrand that either in a Hungarian national livery or in Wizz livery, which I think would be the most interesting here.
That'd be weird.
Yeah, it would be fun.
I also always thought it was weird that Qatar disliked the A330 freighter so much, even though it was in desperate need for freighter lift, even placing the orders for the 747-8 freighters after the embargo kicked in. So it really needed to ramp up its cargo operation, but it disliked the A330 freighter so much it got rid of them.
I mean, I don't know what to tell you because I don't have a lot of experience with the A330 freighter. Maybe one of our listeners can tell us why Qatar didn't like them so much, but they didn't, and they found a home with Wizz now, or with the Hungarian government, and operated by Wizz. But interesting, and just one of those random aircraft deliveries, nonetheless. Speaking of strange, random, and surprising, Southwest Airlines is going to begin operations at Chicago's O'Hare Airport and Houston's International Airport relatively soon, in the next year, which I did not expect, but seems to make some sense.
Yeah,
I guess.
That's different, but also it seems like everyone's coming at United these days. JetBlue did the same. In Newark, they invaded Newark and started up some Mint routes out to LA in direct competition with United. And now Southwest is doing the same. They're going to the north of Houston and the north of Chicago. And I look forward to one day flying Southwest between LaGuardia and Chicago, I hope, because that route could use some extra competition.
I would like to see that. What would be interesting to me is where Southwest ends up physically going at the airport.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about that, as in where does Southwest end up in these airports. But I'm guessing some other airlines will eventually drop out, not by choice, and some space will open up for them.
And that's entirely possible. A new airline has flown its first passenger flight. Zip Air, the Japanese low-cost carrier, which had been due to start service with their 787 earlier this year, pushed back passenger service. They had been operating cargo-only service throughout COVID, and they just started passenger flights last week. And the first flight had 2 passengers on it.
That's not great.
No, that's not great. Obviously, the cargo is still doing a lot of the revenue generation here, but 2 passengers, not great.
Not great. So Zip Air, not the first new airline to start up operations in the region. Remember, Starlux out of Taiwan started up at the beginning of the pandemic, and really bad timing on behalf of both of these right now. I hope they both make it, but at least
I hope so too.
At least Zip Air has the corporate backing of JAL to see it through this. Starlux had nothing, so good luck.
So really quick stuff before we go today. Airbus has delivered the 1500th A330. That went to Delta and promptly flew into avoiding tariff storage in Amsterdam, I believe. So you can't fly on it yet, I don't think, but it's been delivered.
An inauspicious milestone.
So that's nice. Yeah, so that becomes the A330 becomes only the third wide-body aircraft to have over 1,500 deliveries. Jason, can you tell me the other 2?
747?
And?
737?
No, wide-body aircraft.
Oh, wide bodies. 747, yep. And not going to be the A300 or A310. 767?
The 777.
Oh, really? So the 767 never made that milestone?
I don't think so.
Wow. That's surprising.
Or if it did, a combination of passenger and freight, pure freight. So we will double check that. But yeah, 747 and then the 777 are the other two. The A320 MSN 10,000, so not the 10,000th delivered A320 family aircraft, but MSN 10,000 was delivered to Middle East Airlines, registered T7ME3 because it is their third A321neo. And what else do we have? Oh, the first A321 passenger to freight conversion that we had talked about previously was delivered. So I checked the registration, and the interesting thing to me, I don't know if they did this on purpose, and I really hope they did. The registration, it's operated by Qantas Freight for the Australian Post, and the registration is VHULD. Now,
I get it.
Yeah, right? I really hope this is on purpose. So ULD stands for unit load device. It's the container that they put onto an aircraft to put stuff into to standardize the containers. And I really hope they did that on purpose.
It can't be an accident. No way.
If it's an accident, that would be an incredible accident. But I really hope they did it on purpose. And finally, there's a new tail in town.
Does it begin with jet and end with blue?
It does.
Wow.
So their first A220 rolled off. That'll be interesting. Oh, and just out today, looking at some schedule info, it looks like Delta will take delivery of their first A220-300 at the end of this week. So you could be listening to the podcast when it comes out on Friday and watching the delivery flight of Delta's first A220-300.
Oh, and one more thing about the JetBlue 220. The new tail fin design is named Hops, and I believe it's the first one where they're also painting the winglets, which is interesting. But a number of people commented on how sharp it looks and how visually kind of great the whole package is, and that the engines have a really nice blue hue to them on the front, and how the slats on the front of the wings are orange. No. I've got some bad news for you. We've seen this before, I think, with Egypt Air. Those are not a part of the livery. They're not a part of the design. They are kind of like when you get a new piece of electronic hardware where it has some sort of plastic cover over the screen.
The cling film.
Yeah, it's that. Unfortunately, the ring on the front of the engine is not blue. The slats on the front of the wings are not orange. They are just visually distinctive, so they're taken off before the aircraft is actually flown or put into service. But I think it would look really good if they somehow came up with the ability to paint those parts of the aircraft.
It does make for very good photography.
It looks good.
It does. It was the Egypt Air A220 where we were like, oh, that looks great. And
why do I remember things like that?
I honestly don't know, but I am very thankful that you do. Well, this has been episode 96 of AvTalk. We're inching closer to episode 100. A few of you wrote in and provided some helpful suggestions on what we should be doing for episode 100. The floor is still open to any and all suggestions.
We've got nothing.
We at this point we're just scratching our brains, but we'll think of something, I hope. But in the meantime, please email us podcast@fr24.com, or you can find Jason and I roaming the halls of Twitter on a regular basis. But until then, thank you all for listening very much, and we will see you next episode. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.